The Sex Pistols didn't bother inventing a poetic reason to get back together. After a spectacularly bitter breakup in 1978, the band spent nearly 2 decades not speaking, not performing, and presumably not exchanging birthday cards. Then, in 1996, they climbed back on stage, and Johnny Rotten said the quiet part out loud. The one thing the band could actually agree on anymore was the audience's money. They didn't even try to dress it up. They called the whole thing the Filthy Lucre Tour, which might be the most honest tour name in rock history. No teary reconciliation, no rediscovered brotherhood. Just 4 guys realizing people would pay real money to watch them stand near each other again. The personal issues never actually went away. They just got quietly outvoted by ticket sales. So punk's most anti-establishment band ended up running the most straightforward capitalist experiment in the genre. Turns out anarchy has a price, and apparently it's negotiable.
See my face, not a race. I just
Mötley Crüe turned their goodbye into a legal document, which tells you everything about how much they trusted themselves, facing decades of feuds, addiction, and enough dysfunction to fill several unauthorized biographies. The band signed something called a cessation of touring agreement in 2014, a contract promising fans this really was the end. They played their supposed final show in 2015. For a while, it looked like they'd stuck the landing. Then the dirt landed on Netflix, interest spiked, and that carefully signed agreement got theatrically torn up on stage because nothing says rock and roll quite like breaking a legally binding retirement promise. By 2022, Mötley Crüe and Def Leppard were co-headlining a stadium tour that grossed around $173.5 million. Maybe money wasn't the only reason they came back, but they did sign a document specifically designed to stop themselves, and it didn't work. Next time, maybe just skip the paperwork.
We gotta find the finds. We gotta scheme the schemes. We gotta line the lines.
The Who announced their farewell tour in 1982, which in hindsight was less an ending and more a really long intermission. By 1989, they were back for a 25th anniversary tour, and Pete Townsend later admitted, without much fuss, that money was the actual trigger. John Entwistle was even blunter, making clear the tour income wasn't optional. It was necessary. The reunion reportedly came with a genuinely enormous payday, and enormous paydays tend to have a clarifying effect on old ambivalence about touring.
We're trying to find the face. Cause if we find the face, we're gonna be rich.
Townsend had spent years explaining how much he didn't enjoy life on the road, and those feelings got noticeably more manageable once the number got bigger. None of the internal tension actually disappeared. It just got politely shelved for the tour dates. It remains one of the cleanest examples in rock of a band. Discovering retirement gets a lot harder once promoters start writing serious checks. My generation, indeed. Turns out that generation still answers the phone for the right price.
Eminence front. Eminence front. It's a foot on. Back in New York. I'm back.
Kiss spent the 80s fractured, unmasked, and increasingly resentful, with Ace Frehley and Peter Criss long gone, and years of bad blood simmering underneath makeup nobody was even wearing anymore. Then in 1996, the original 4 climbed back into the grease paint, and Kiss discovered something extraordinary. Nostalgia, it turns out, is an incredibly profitable business model. The reunion tour became one of the biggest events in rock, proving fans didn't much care about backstage grudges as long as the fire-breathing stayed intact. Old personality problems resurfaced soon enough, and eventually Criss and Frehley disappeared from the lineup again, presumably back to whatever room they'd been avoiding each other in. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley kept the machine running for decades, complete with merchandise, arena shows, and multiple farewell tours. Simmons has never pretended this was about anything other than business, which honestly is almost refreshing. Kiss didn't just reunite for money. Kiss basically built an empire on the idea that reunions are good accounting. David Lee Roth left Van Halen in 1985 after things with Eddie Van Halen became genuinely unbearable. And the two men spent the next couple of decades demonstrating an impressive commitment to not getting along. Reconciliation attempts kept collapsing, including that infamous false start at the 1996 MTV Video Music Awards, which fooled absolutely nobody into thinking a real reunion was happening. And yet, the classic Roth-era catalog never stopped being worth a fortune, the kind of detail that tends to outlast a grudge eventually. In 2007, Roth finally returned for a full tour alongside Eddie and Alex Van Halen, with Wolfgang stepping in on bass for Michael Anthony. Despite everything, the reunion was a massive success and led to further touring and a new album. The personal chemistry had been a disaster for years. The commercial chemistry somehow never missed a beat. Roth and Eddie could apparently agree on almost nothing, except that stadiums full of paying fans were worth showing up for. Ozzy Osbourne's relationship with Black Sabbath had been broken since his firing in 1979, followed by years of competing solo careers, resentment, and occasional half-hearted reconciliation attempts. But the commercial pull of reuniting Ozzy with Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler proved impossible to resist forever, and Sabbath brought the original trio back together for major shows starting in the late 90s. That eventually led to the 2013 album 13 and a massive farewell tour built heavily around the reunited original lineup. Even then, the reunion wasn't quite complete because a contractual dispute kept drummer Bill Ward off the stage entirely. That detail actually makes the money angle stronger, not weaker. Even putting the classic lineup back together turned into an argument about what everyone's participation was financially worth. Decades of dysfunction couldn't kill Black Sabbath's commercial value. And honestly, the arguing over percentages might be the most rock and roll part of this entire story.
I turned my collar to the cold and damp when my eyes were stabbed.
Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel split in 1970 and spent the next several decades proving that childhood friendship has an expiration date. Their 1993 reunion attempt reportedly ended in actual backstage shoving, which is not the wholesome image most fans have of two guys harmonizing about bridges over troubled water.
You move too fast. You got to make the morning last. Just
Then, in 2003, they picked up a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Grammys, performed together, and that ceremonial nudge somehow turned into the Old Friends Tour, a full-scale reunion running through 2003 and 2004 that grossed an estimated $123 million. Fans got the harmonies back. What they didn't get was an actual friendship, because the iciness between the two men reportedly hardened right back up once the tour wrapped. A planned 2010 tour got scrapped after Garfunkel's voice gave out, and by 2016, Simon was flatly ruling out any future reunion, admitting the two of them simply didn't get along. Old friends, sure, just don't ask them to hang out afterward.
and the sign flashed its warning. Voices inside my head.
Sting, Stuart Copeland, and Andy Summers didn't break up the Police because nobody was paying attention anymore. They just imploded while sitting on top of the world, with the relationship between Sting and Copeland becoming particularly combustible along the way. For more than 2 decades, a real reunion looked about as likely as the three of them agreeing on a restaurant. Then, in 2007, they somehow managed to coexist long enough for a massive world tour, one that ended up grossing somewhere between $360 and $386 million, depending on which accounting you trust.
You make the best of what's still around. When the water's running down.
Sting, it should be said, did not exactly need the money, and neither did the other two, which makes the whole thing more interesting, not less, because the opportunity itself had become so enormous that 3 musicians who genuinely couldn't function together in the 80s found a way to make it work for one final run. Sometimes the math is simply too good to keep hating each other over.
Never quite seems the same when you awaken.
The Eagles broke up in 1980 with a level of bitterness that became genuinely legendary, and Don Henley famously joked the band would reunite when hell froze over. For 14 years, hell apparently held steady at a comfortable temperature, and nobody expected that forecast to ever change. Then, in 1994 came the reunion, appropriately titled Hell Freezes Over, and the whole supposedly impossible reconciliation turned into a massive commercial success almost overnight.
Tell me it's alright. Help me through the night.
The old tensions didn't magically vanish, and the Eagles would go on dealing with plenty more internal conflict in the years that followed. But the reunion made one thing very clear. However hostile the breakup had been, the Eagles brand had only gotten more valuable, while everyone was busy not speaking to each other. Turns out, absence doesn't just make the heart grow fonder, it makes the ticket prices grow considerably steeper too. Hell may have frozen over eventually, but the box office stayed remarkably warm the entire time.
Living it up at the Hotel California.
Axl Rose and Slash spent roughly 2 decades apart after one of the ugliest band breakdowns in rock history, filled with public accusations, competing lineups, and zero indication these two men would ever willingly share a stage again. Slash left Guns N' Roses in the 90s. Axl kept the name going with an entirely different lineup, and reconciliation seemed less like a possibility and more like a punchline. Then in 2016, Slash and Duff McKagan came back for the wonderfully self-aware Not in This Lifetime tour, a title that basically admitted the joke before anyone else could make it. The result was staggering. The tour grossed more than $500 million, making it one of the highest grossing tours ever at the time. Maybe Genuine Time healed some real wounds. Or maybe $500 million has a way of making old grudges feel a little more negotiable. Either way, it turns out even the messiest breakups have a price where reconciliation starts looking reasonable. So there you have it. 10 bands who couldn't stand each other until the numbers got too big to ignore. Say what you want about selling out. Every single one of these tours sold out. Literally. What do you think? Is Chasing the Payday a betrayal of the music, or just smart business wearing a nostalgia costume? Tell me which reunion surprised you most in the comments. I read every one. And if classic rock runs through your veins, hit subscribe and stick around for more.
And the sun